Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 500 library systems across the US, Canada, and New Zealand with the goal of making Author Talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator in conversation with each of the acclaimed authors and presenters that you will hear from throughout our series. Today, we are so honored to have acclaimed and best-selling author Philippa Gregory with us to chat about her new novel, Boleyn Traitor. Look at that cover. I know everybody's ready to get started. So am I. Before we begin, I want to give everyone that standard housekeeping information that keeps everything running smoothly. We have compiled some questions that were pre-submitted with registration, but you can also submit questions during the entirety of the talk by clicking the questions button that's just below the live stream video. Keep in mind, there are a lot of you tuning in today, so we'll get to as many questions as time allows. And don't worry if you have to leave early for any reason whatsoever, all registrants will receive a link to the recording in about 24 hours. Now to formally introduce our guest for today. Dr. Philippa Gregory is one of the world's foremost historical novelists. She wrote her first ever novel, Wide Acre, when she was completing her PhD in 18th century literature, and it sold worldwide, heralding a new era for historical fiction. Her flair for blending history and imagination developed into a signature style, and Philippa went on to write many best-selling novels, including ones that we know and love, The Other Boleyn Girl and The White Queen, among many others. Dr. Gregory studied history at the University of Sussex and was awarded a PhD by the University of Edinburgh, where she is a regent and was made Alumna of the Year in 2009. In 2021, she was awarded a CBE for services to literature and to her charity Gardens for the Gambia, and was elected as a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society. I know we are ready to get to this conversation, but before we bring Philippa on, we're going to play a short book trailer for everyone to get you ready and excited about our chat about the new book, Boleyn Traitor. Hi, Philippa. How are you?
Hello, everybody. I'm very well, thank you.
Welcome. I just noticed on the book trailer that it said an evening with Philippa, and it is evening for you, so that still works.
Definitely, I'm having an evening with me. Are you guys having an afternoon? What is it there?
Yes. So I'm in Central Time in the US, so it's 1 o'clock here. So it'll be between like 2 and probably between 11 and 2, basically across the country.
Okay.
So congratulations on the publication of Boleyn Traitor, and we are also excited to be back in the Tudor court. So thank you for that.
It's a pleasure. Yeah.
Yes. So we have a lot of questions. I'm gonna dive in. Thank you for sending over that lovely trailer. But can you tell us? So we're back in the Tudor court. How is this book different, and who does it follow this time?
This book follows the character of Jane Boleyn, wife of George, and therefore sister-in-law of Queen Anne. And she's niggled me without, I'm sure, intending to, for literally years, that there's never been an adequate explanation for why she was apparently involved in the trial against her husband and sister-in-law. And then she's clearly involved in the court ever after that. She doesn't fall with the Boleyns. She actually rises to great success. And then finally, we meet her again when she's chief lady in waiting to Catherine Howard, who is her cousin. And she is again involved in royal adultery. And it's no spoiler to tell you that Catherine Howard loses her.
Oh, you're muted all of a sudden, Philippa. Hold on, let's see.
Hello, am I back with you?
Okay. Yes, that worked. I don't know how you got muted all of a sudden.
So she's at the court of Catherine Howard, and she's certainly part of Catherine Howard's adultery against the King Henry VIII, which causes Catherine's death. So she couldn't be closer to the great stories of the Tudor court and the women of the Tudor court. She serves every single one of Henry's queens except the last, and that's because he has by then killed her. I mean, it's a very dark story.
Yeah, wow. Katrina from Calgary Public Library is saying, having read and been fascinated by many of your books set in the Tudor period, what draws you back as an author to continue to write about this time and place in history again and again?
I think, in a sense, it's a terribly interesting period of history. And what you see, especially with the Tudors, is how each era of history has their own Tudors in a way that we're all interested in them, but for different reasons. So the Victorians are fascinated by the Tudors, and they do the majority of the heavy lifting of the research into the Tudor court. But what they're looking at is a place which is sort of pre-empire. They're looking at the consolidation of England into a very centralized, undemocratic, powerful central court with an administration, and that spreads out from that across the world. And of course, that speaks to the Victorian dream of how they think a country should be run. To us, I think the centralization of power and the dominance of Henry VIII tells us a very, very different story, one that we see as probably more problematic, quite frightening. Nowadays, we see tyranny as a real danger to the democratic institutions and traditions of our country. And Henry VIII is a real example of how you start with a popular, powerful leader who turns into a demagogue and into a danger, both to his wives and his friends and to his country.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned tyranny, and I flagged a couple of different times where you make very pointed references to Machiavelli in the book, especially just as things are about to unravel, almost as like a foreshadowing. Was this a very intentional thing to use Machiavelli throughout the book?
Well, excuse me, it's a fascinating thing that Jane's father, Lord Morley, was a Renaissance scholar, as Machiavelli was. And Jane's father, Lord Morley, actually translates the philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli from Italian into English. And Machiavelli's greatest book is called The Prince, which is basically a how-to manual for tyrants. He says, if you want to rule successfully, you have to be the only person with power. So it's a very, very extraordinary connection between excuse me, sorry, the Tudor court and Jane's father, and Thomas Cromwell, who is at that time developing the tyrannical powers of Henry VIII.
Mm-hmm. Donna from Buena Vista Public Library is wondering what conditions are necessary for a political center, like a historical kingdom, to move to intrigue, secrets, backbiting, and basically what we would call the toxic environment if we were to talk about it in today's terms.
Well, the research that I did for this included not only historical research, but I also researched tyrants generally. I read a book on Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini, and it's clear that even in quite developed and quite literate and quite connected communities, first of all, you get a real appeal to the popular vote, that someone seems very, very popular, that he voices for the people their sense of injustice and their desire for a complete different change, and a sort of a break with the past, which has served them so badly. Henry VIII did all of that. He was a new king. It was a big break from his father, and his father, in any case, was an invading king. So it was a break from the Plantagenets. The Tudors were a new reign, and Henry did what tyrants do, which is they start off taking power by general acclaim, and then they find ways to use, because he's advised by Thomas Cromwell and before him Thomas Wolsey, and also by Anne Boleyn, who are very, very astute politicians. They find ways to actually exploit the traditions and customs which were holding the country together in a way to hold the king's power together. So what they do is in the case of, for instance, the Reformation, Henry VIII figures out with the advice of Anne Boleyn and others, how to take the extraordinary power and wealth of the church into his own. And it's that really frees him to really do whatever he likes. He's now the wealthiest man by a long, long way from anyone else in England. And he has also made himself head of the church. So he is, in a sense, allowed to rule on spiritual matters as well as temporal.
Mm-hmm. There's the saying, the man is the head, but the woman is the neck. And so like that's kind of what I thought of when reading about how Anne and her involvement with creating laws and her involvement with the Reformation. How much of Anne Boleyn's involvement in the origins of the Reformation, England's Reformation and split from the Catholic Church is evidenced?
Oh, we know that it's her chaplain who first comes up, Cranmer, who first comes up with the suggestion that it could be done legally and that it is an appropriate thing to do. So the whole idea of how to separate from Catherine of Aragon comes as part of the Reformation, which is obviously of prime interest to Anne Boleyn. And then we subsequently see all the other reasons why the other laws that she gets changed, things like the inheritance rights and the supremacy of the king. All of these things not only create Henry as a tyrant, but they make her and her succession guaranteed and safe. So in a sense, what she does is she frees Henry and she shows Henry his power with the intention of securing her own place. And in effect, she actually has armed the man who in the end turns out to be her murderer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've heard you mention in other interviews that history has been unkind to Jane. You've been kind of painting her as a sex-crazed, unwomanly monster. So what did you want to see? Kay from Montgomery County Library saying, what drove you to this perspective that you took on Jane Boleyn's character and actions?
Well, I think Jane is a really prime example of how women are described according to their actions, but according to the observers. I wrote a book recently, a huge history book of the history of women of England. It's called Making History, 1066 to 1990. It's 900 years of making history from 1066. And the point of it was to show that over and over again, women only enter the record and they're described by the historians of the time. They're not described at the time, and they're not described in any realistic way at all. Jane's really interesting that the first description we have of her from contemporary Tudor chroniclers is very, very slight, very, very light, just a mention of her here and there as a lady of the court or a woman taking part in a masque or someone dressed in a particular colour on a day that the chronicler is describing. They don't say at the time that she has anything to do with the trial of her husband or her sister-in-law. They don't say that she gives any evidence. But when you get a later retelling of the story, particularly by the Victorians, they link her charge of being involved in Catherine Howard's adultery with the charge of Anne Boleyn's adultery. They've got no evidence for that, but there's just this assumption that she's got form, that she's a woman who would do that sort of thing. She's a bad woman in the Victorian view. And then subsequent to that, you get the post-Freudian understanding of her, which comes in after about the 1950s, when people start suggesting that she has some sexual motivation for being involved in these two adulteries. People go so far as to suggest that she's a voyeur and that she likes to watch queens of England having sex, which I have to say is very, very niche. You'd have to have a very, very remarkable particular perversion if that was your particular perversion. And then we come to the present day and we have more historians writing sort of forensic mental health material. And so the suggestion is that she goes mad after her accusation and that she is unstable all through her life. And it just seemed to me that these are so typical of the historians. They are not typical of the woman. What is the real woman doing? And what if you had a really commonsensical approach to it? If you said, is there any reason for her to do any of these things that she is accused of doing? And particularly with the claim about her madness, there's a very, very good reason for her to pretend to be mad, because people who were regarded as insane, who were proven to be insane, could not be put on trial and could not be executed. So if she could convince Henry VIII's physician that she was mad, she could save her life.
Mhm.
And but she does convince him. We've got the physician's report that says he believes she's mad, but she doesn't save her life, because Henry, like all tyrants, changes the law in order to persecute his enemies. So although she's registered as insane, he kills her anyway.
So I'm wondering what in the other Boleyn girl, we know Jane as Jane Parker, George's wife, and then here she's referenced as Jane Boleyn. And in the other Boleyn girl, from Mary's perspective, she did seem sex crazed. George was sharing those that she was trying to do all different kinds of sexual things with him and get him to do different things. So when did your perspective on Jane change? Did you always have the current perspective that she has now? Because she also would skulk around in the other Boleyn girl, like they knew she was spying.
Yes, I really bought the view of her as sexually hyperactive and as a spy. I believe she was a spy, and there's some evidence for that. Certainly Cromwell employed a massive spy network across all of Europe, across England, and in the court. And we actually know the names of some ladies who spied for him, and she certainly provided evidence for him at the divorce, the annulment of the marriage of Anne of Cleves. So we've got her name on a witness statement there, and the witness statement is almost certainly false. So she's working for Cromwell by then. I think she probably was working for him before, because there's a period in her life where she gets exiled from court. And I don't think any of the Boleyns bring her back. I think Thomas Cromwell brings her back. And I think from that point, she's reporting on everything that passes in the Queen's rooms, Anne's behaviour, George's behaviour, anybody else's behaviour, just as part of a general information service. So I think the spying I'd stand behind. The sexual perversion, we know that the George and Jane did not have children, and that's very, very unusual. And so that does make you wonder if they were having sex or if one of them was infertile. And of course, we know that the Tudor medicine didn't believe in male infertility. So the responsibility for conceiving would fall all on Jane's shoulders. And she would feel that very strongly, because she's married to the heir of the Boleyns. It's her job to get an heir to the heir. So I think the idea that she would be trying to conceive a child with him is not very far-fetched at all. But I certainly wouldn't go along with the idea now that she was in any way sexually perverse, because there's no evidence for that, except in the opinions of historians who went before me. And I was probably readier to accept that argument 20 years ago than I would be now. I'm much more much keener on looking at the actual historical evidence and making my own mind up now than taking other people's opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've talked about before how you think that historical fiction has at least two dates. Can you talk about what you mean by this and how it plays into this novel?
Well, yes, this novel, as all historical fiction, has, in a sense, two dates. There's the one date that the author is telling you that they put at the, you know, in my case, I put at the top of the chapter and say, here we are, Greenwich, 1520 or whatever we're talking about. And then there's the date that it's written, because however good a novelist.
Oh, you're muted again. I don't know what keeps happening. You've muted again.
Hello,
Okay.
I don't know why it's doing
Okay.
that. Sorry. It's completely spontaneous. It is probably Jane Boleyn's ghost. It's all
keeping us on our toes.
Yeah. So every historical novel has two times intrinsic to it, and one is the date that the author's describing, and the other is the author's consciousness, because however good a novelist you are, you cannot free yourself from your own awareness, your own consciousness, your own unconsciousness. So if you read a book, say the Jean Plaidy or the Anya Seton or even Georgette Hare, that was written round about the 1950s, the sort of underlying morality, the underlying understanding of what is the world like is that of a woman of the 1950s. If you read my books, you read the underlying understanding of what the world is like, what matters, what doesn't matter, of a woman writing in the 2000s. And there's no escaping that. However much you try and imagine yourself into the shoes of a medieval woman, you can do a lot. You can do a lot of imagining what she sees and imagining what she would feel. But at the end of the day, there is always the betrayal of yourself that you are the author. So nobody reads a book of mine without, I think, now recognizing my voice and my imagination and my consciousness is at work behind the story.
Mm-hmm. So Elizabeth and a lot of other people want to know then, what is your process for bringing those historical characters to life? Do you get dressed up? Do you go, what do you do to put yourself in that mentality?
It's always, I always want to apologize for a boring answer, but I just read. I read constantly about the period, and then I read little detailed histories of artifacts in the period. I go to the places that I'm writing about. I do understand the clothes, so I don't habitually dress up. That would be slightly crazy.
You said habitually, though.
Yeah, no, not habitually. And then I just, the other thing is that I've been writing about this period of history for 30 years now. So I'm deeply up with everything that's newly written. So I read all the new books and I reread the old books. And when I am pretty sure that I understand what is happening in the story and I'm pretty sure of the personality that I'm writing about, then I sometimes meet with the character's biographer or with other historians and just say, am I describing the sort of person that you know? Do we have the same person in mind? And if I don't do that, then I just literally go for long walks with my dog, and I try and feel myself into her shoes. And there's a moment which is a novelist's moment, not a historian's moment, when I just have a sense that I'm ready to start writing. And that's a great morning. That's a really great morning when I go like, yes, I know where I'm going now. Mm-hmm. I know what the story is about for this first draft, and I'm ready to start. And then when I finish the first draft and I reread what I've written, and that's about a year on, I have a moment where I go like, oh, I thought this book was about this. And although the history is there and the story is there, the sort of the meta story, the story behind it, what is it really about? What does it really tell us about life? What does it tell us about being a woman? What does it tell us about power? Or what is it really about? Then that comes to me after I've finished the first story, which is ostensibly the story of the novel. And then I rewrite it with that awareness, and the language changes during that period of time, and my sense of the significance of the book and the importance of the book, and sometimes the beauty of the book, that changes then. It's the second draft where I really know where I'm going.
Wow. That's incredible. Eileen is asking, historical fiction balances facts with creativity. So as you just eloquently explained, so I have to ask, are you more of a plotter or a pantser? Or are you a plantser who does both?
I think what I've always found with history is that I mostly write, as it were, fictional biographies. And so some lives are quite well known. And so all I have to do, I say all I have to do, but what I have to do is I have to get, in a sense, a really detailed timeline of where my character is and what she is doing in this period of time. And then I have to know what everyone is doing around her. And then I have the $1 million question is why?
Yeah.
So any historian can tell you what somebody is doing on a day in history if we have the chronicle to go back to. But the novelist question is, why are they doing that? And that's the bit that is the creativity. And that's the bit that makes the character come absolutely off the page, and it stops being, in a sense, a list of facts, and it starts being a real narrative where you want to know more. And it's the why question which does it.
Mm-hmm. So why do you choose to write your historical characters, at least a majority of them, in first person present tense? Why is that important?
First person, because for me, the process of getting into the novel is to get in via one person. And when I choose her, and it's usually a female, but I have written novels from the perspective of a man, when I feel like I understand her and I know what she's done in her life, and when I'm starting to get a feeling for the why has she done these things, so a sense of her personality, it's very fresh and exciting to tell it from her point of view. And that's particularly true if it's a character that we don't know very well. As it were, being in your study pretending to be Elizabeth I is not uncommon amongst historians and writers of fiction. But being in your study pretending to be Mary Boleyn that nobody's heard about, that's a big stretch. And that's really exciting to do. And that gives you a whole lot of leeway in terms of thinking in a sympathetic, empathic, imaginative, but common sense way about the character. And present tense is just, I think, the way, a really, really quick and easy way to avoid the curse of the historian. All historians are cursed with knowing how the story ends. And you cannot write an interesting narrative if all the way through you know that nothing happens as a result of it. It all goes to hell. The plot doesn't work, the conspiracy doesn't happen, the rope ladder breaks. You might as well not have bothered. If you start from knowing the end, then you cannot write an exciting unfolding story. So by being in present tense and by being really strict with myself when I'm telling the story about almost trying to forget the outcome, then you get all of the tension of life, of a novel, back into what is otherwise a historical story looking back in time over hundreds of years, bound to be in a way boring.
I'm wondering if when you're writing, the cohesion between characters is organic or if it's planned. So, for example, Thomas Cromwell and Jane Boleyn seem to mirror one another in a lot of ways, in wit and strategy and in intellect, sometimes even personality a little bit in this book. So, was that an intentional choice for that character development, or was that something organic that came as you were writing?
Yeah, I don't do character development as you describe. It is much more organic. So I think when I get an idea of my character and I start writing, then more comes to me as I'm writing, and she sort of unfolds for me. And in this particular novel, there's a period of time we open at court when she is, in a sense, master courtier. She's really serving as Anne Boleyn's lady in waiting, and she's doing a good job of it. She knows exactly what she has to do, and she is part of this well-oiled court machinery which keeps primarily Henry VIII happy, and secondarily Anne happy, and thirdly, as her job, her husband happy. So she has these network of duties which she really understands. And then quite early in the novel, it goes wrong. She's trying to do what they want, but what she's trying to do fails. And Henry VIII exiles her from court. And there's a moment then where she's sent away from court back to her childhood home. But there's no place for her in her childhood home anymore because she left such a long time ago. She left as a little girl of 12. And so you get this sense when she is saying, so what am I? What is the point of my life? And you, I think, with her, alongside her, experience that existential despair and desolation. And it is from that point that she goes back to court and rebuilds her life. And the person who brings her back to court and the person who shows her how to be a courtier in this way that cannot fail is Thomas Cromwell. And I think they are quite symmetrical, as you suggest, but I think it's because he is the person who models for her how to survive in this new increasingly dangerous, increasingly terrifying court, which is the court of a tyrant.
Mm-hmm. Jessica from Berlin Peck Memorial Library says, on the subject of plotting your storylines, how do you take the characters from one plot point to the next, given the magnitude of historical details you have to choose from? What makes you decide to include or exclude certain elements?
That's such an interesting question, Jessica. Sometimes there are things that you simply cannot miss. Like you would have to be extraordinarily risk-taking to go like, I'm going to do Elizabeth I, but I can't be bothered to do the Armada. You know, you would miss out on a real example of her character formation. But in general, I try and take it from the character's point of view, and that's why first person helps so much. You go like, what out of this enormous story really forms her character or really strikes her? What is interesting and important to her? Not what is interesting to a man historian 400 years later who is particularly interested in political history. You know, no. What is interested in this woman living at that time? She's not going to observe the massive changes in the constitution to the monasteries. She's not going to observe the technical details of the changes in the law. She's going to really notice when it impacts on whether she can go to church in the way that she used to go to, or whether her priest is operating in the house or is now suddenly disappeared and is in the church now. It's the personal stuff that she's going to notice. We know that because we ourselves living in interesting political times. It's when it's on your doorstep that it really worries you. That's when you notice it. And so in a way, by going into the personal life of the characters, that's what gives you their viewpoint, and their viewpoint tells you what the story is going to include.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Kelsey from Mark Twain Library says, I've been reading your books on the Tudors since 2005. I'm still reading your books and you're still writing about them. So what do you see as the enduring relevancy of these historical individuals?
I think it's the time they're in. It is a time in which, in a sense, England is being formed as a nation. The Tudors, although they don't last very long, are extraordinarily important in centralizing power in London and in the southern states of England. It's a time, it's a time where, the Tudors, during all of the Tudors, if you count Elizabeth as well, as of course you must.
Oh no, muted again. Maybe it's Elizabeth's ghost.
We start expanding empire, we start establishing slavery. So many of the changes which determine later English life are set up in the Tudor period. So as a historian, it's a period that I'm fascinated by. But also, as a woman historian, as a feminist, this is a time where women, in a sense, rise to their greatest authority in centuries. We have a reigning queen for the first time ever. And also they're in their greatest danger in that it's the first time that we have a husband who is prepared to use the law to murder his wives. So I think Henry VIII is really interesting to modern women, modern historian and modern readers, as a wife killer, as well as Henry VIII, the big Henry VIII of history. And that's something which I think has become more and more interesting to women as we become more and more concerned about male abuse of male power at every level in society.
Mm-hmm. We've had a lot of people submit the question of, do you think Henry VIII has ever regretted what he did to his wives?
There's no evidence that he ever regretted it. There is lots of evidence that he was sad that Jane Seymour died, and they went into a period of extended mourning after her death. But before her death, he was clearly looking around for other women, and he was unfaithful to her during her pregnancy. So I think you really have to stretch the facts to get the idea of a moral Henry VIII who would be capable of regret and remorse. My reading of Henry VIII is that he's a really shocking covert narcissist, and possibly even a psychopath. I think the number of people he kills really indicates that you're talking about a psychopath. It doesn't really matter that he's legally able to do so, because he changes the law in order to do so. And saying that, the only death that he really clearly regrets and expresses his regrets for is Thomas Cromwell. And that's because Thomas Cromwell was Henry VIII's best administrator and was the most competent person to getting the king's whims turned into facts. Mm-hmm. And Henry VIII regrets his death very much and complains that the Howards led him on to kill Thomas Cromwell. He never, I think, expresses any regret for killing his wives, Anne and Catherine, that he clearly had no political reason or no safety reason to do. He killed them because he was so furious with them.
Mm-hmm. How much fact is there to, so in Boleyn Traitor, you talk about Henry VIII and Jane Seymour dancing as soon as Anne's head as soon as Anne has been beheaded, and they're off, at a ball or some sort of celebration. And so that really lends itself to the psychopathy that you're talking about. Is there evidence that was happening?
Yeah, it's on the record. He got them to sound the cannon of the tower at the moment of her death, so that he would know that she was dead. And he is being entertained by Jane Seymour at a dinner, and they are wearing yellow, matching yellow gowns, and they dance that evening. Mm-hmm. It's brutal. It really is
very brutal.
He is as bad as I describe him. I don't need to add any darkness to my portrait of Henry VIII to stay right within the historical record.
Oh, wow. Annette from Cuyahoga County Public Library is saying, has your research ever led you to a new opinion?
Oh, constantly. That's the great joy of it. Yes, I mean, certainly I have a completely different opinion of Jane Boleyn, having now read what there is about her, which isn't very much. There's only 2 good biographies, and they're modern, and they are the ones that really inspired me to think again about her and not to take this sort of standard traditional view of her. I constantly do research and think, no, that's probably not the case. One of the biggest ones was I wrote a book about Amy Dudley. It's called The Virgin's Lover. And it's about Robert Dudley, who is, I believe, Elizabeth I's lover. And it's about his wife, who is, according to the historical record, when I started researching her, died in an accident falling down some stone stairs. And after I had looked at the stairs themselves, at the records of her death, I was convinced that someone had murdered her in order to smear her husband so that he couldn't marry Queen Elizabeth. And after I had written the novel, a historian found the records of the inquest, and she wasn't dead of a broken neck as a result of a fall. She had what they call 2 dints. They mean deep holes, like you would get from a hammer blow in her head. She was murdered. And, I've just thought the likelihood of her falling downstairs in those circumstances was so unlikely that I thought she must be murdered. And I wrote the novel with that as the fictional story, and then subsequently found out that it was in fact the truth. That's what's so lovely about writing historical fiction, that you can speculate in a way which historians dare not, and then every now and then you're right.
Every now and then you get the little Easter egg of somebody going, look what we found. You were absolutely right. That's incredible. Yeah. Sandra from South Coastal Library says, what was the most revealing or unexpected discovery that you've made regarding gender power dynamics with women at court?
I mean, I think most people would be very, very shocked and surprised to realize that Henry VIII is literally able to sleep with anybody he wants, and that even someone like Thomas Culpeper, who is so attractive in my novel, is involved in an assault upon a gatekeeper's wife, which sounds very much like rape, and he is not brought to trial about it. It's just completely ignored. So I think the extraordinary violence, which is a matter of everyday experience for women, and their lack of power over sexual consent, is probably quite shocking, because we probably have rather a romantic idea of the chivalry of court, and all of the jousting and all of the tournaments and all of the lovely dresses and all of the dances obscure the fact that women are literally completely in the power of men. For example, the Duke of Buckingham, Charles, the friend of Charles, abducts the woman that he wants, and then marriage is allowed to her because he has literally kidnapped her overnight. So her reputation, her honor is ruined. And she then becomes his duchess, and everybody goes like, oh, hope you have a happy life together, which of course they don't. But, I think what is probably surprising to us modern historians is that the widespread abuse of women did not just extend from the tenants and the serfs of the manor, but literally, although court dresses it up with a lot of pretty courtship and a lot of lovely dresses and jewels and rituals, women have no legal rights in the medieval period, and women continue to have no legal rights, for instance, in marriage until 1850. It's terribly late that women start to be able to control their own property or even their own bodies.
Absolutely. So the book cover for this is amazing. Do you have a lot of say in this? Because I feel like it's it fits the story so well. Very dark and gilded.
We're literally, I have to say, we are creating a monster here that I have always weighed in with opinions about my book covers, and I have been widely disregarded. And, that's probably a good idea, because, I'm not a designer or an artist or anything. But on this occasion, my publishers allowed me to, in a room with the jacket designer, and she and I just got together, and she showed me different images. And when I saw the dress, which we call the beast dress, we just gave it that name, which is a gown made of skulls of dead animals, and she put the dress on an image that she also showed me, which was of a woman beautifully masked. And I can't tell you what it means, because this is imagery, not writing. So it's not, if you give me a metaphor, I can tell you what a metaphor means. But when you go into art, it's a mystery to me. But as soon as I saw it, I went like, that's absolutely the jacket I want on this book. And we kept it a secret from the editors and from sales and from marketing until we were absolutely sure that it was the image that we loved. And then I think you in the States have got the better deal of this, that the English have a paper jacket that goes on the outside of the book, in which you only see the woman's head, and you see the beast dress if you take the jacket off, but you have the full dark version.
Yeah, it's really sleek, and also it really fits the story and the Tudor court in general.
Well, I think it's Gothic, and that's not quite right for the period, but it's certainly right for the feel of the book. Yeah. It's got this sense of darkness and horror, and on top of it all, this sense of duplicity and glamour. Yes. So I think it's I'm trying to now explain the jacket, which I cannot explain. Just as soon as I saw it, I went like, that's the jacket I want.
Yes. So I've had a lot of people ask this next question, so I would be remiss if I don't fit it in there. But Julia and many, many others are saying, you've written so many books that feature Henry VIII's wives. I'm sure you feel that you know them by now. If you could sit down with any one of them and have a conversation about their part in the Tudor reign, who would you pick and why?
Well, I do feel that I know them, and in a way, the conversation, I've been having this conversation with them for 20 years now, so there is that sort of sense of intimacy. I think Catherine of Aragon is really underrated, and one of the reasons why I loved my novel about her, which is called The Constant Princess. It looks at her girlhood.
Oh, it muted you again. Now you are frozen.
Idea of her, not as we see her, not as she ends up, not as this old woman, disappointed, rejected by her husband, seeing the religion that she is devoted to being destroyed in the country that she has come to be queen of, seeing her daughter being dishonored and excluded. So the end of Catherine of Aragon's life is absolutely tragic, but her experience as a young woman and as a young queen was absolutely wonderful. It was an experience of one victory after another, and it was really great to write a novel like that about her. And then if we jump over all the other queens that I love equally in their own ways, we go to Catherine Parr. She's the first woman to write in English, to publish over her own name in English. So she's a fantastically important English woman writer, far more important than the years she spends as Henry's last queen. But that's what most people know about her and are interested in her. In fact, she was a great scholar and a profound religious thinker. And also, the story that I love about her is that she married after Henry died. She married for love, which is an achievement for any Tudor woman to manage to do as well. So they're all interesting, but I suppose the two Catherines, the first and the last Catherines, are very close to my heart.
Okay, thank you. So what is the takeaway of this book for you? What do you hope others take away? Or even what does Jane want us to know? What's Jane's takeaway?
I think what Jane would want us to know is that whether a man is a domestic tyrant in that he is a danger to everyone that he says he loves, or whether he's a political tyrant in that he is a danger to his country, both forms of tyranny are often the same. They often occur in the same man, and they both have to be confronted the minute you understand them. So if you leave it too late, it's too late. And in Jane's case, she understands that Henry VIII is a killer of his wives, his friends, and just people who he disagrees with, and that's someone who should be confronted the first time he raises his hand against a woman. And in my country, we have a terrific problem with domestic abuse and domestic violence of men against women, their partners or their wives. We call it the death of loved ones, as if love included this terrible violent behavior. So I'm thinking about that, and I'm also thinking about the way that more than one nation in the world today is sliding towards different forms, but they're all tyrannies, and that the lesson that I think Jane offers us from the Tudor period is that both domestic tyranny and political tyranny have to be confronted and challenged as soon as you see them.
Mm-hmm. Sage advice, Jane. So I always read the print copy and then I read the audiobook while I'm driving around or cleaning the house. And this audiobook is so captivating, as are the others. They pull you right in. You don't want to stop listening. How involved are you in this process? Are you involved in hiring the voice actor? What is your take on the audiobook?
There's a really careful audition process to find the voice for it, and I'm involved in that I offer my tuppence worth, but I'm really aware that I'm not an audio book producer. And the reason that it's so good is because it's being done by people who love audiobooks, who eat and drink audiobooks, and whose daily professional work is the production of an audiobook. With this particular edition, we're very fortunate. We have Gemma Whelan, who she told me, fell in love with the character of Jane and fell in love with the book and found it a transporting experience to go in and read the story, and found herself completely absorbed by the experience of reading the story. We met after she'd finished, and we had there's an interview online which you can find, of her talking to me about her experience of reading the book and the question she came up with about Jane. And at the end of it, when we were off camera, she said, you know, is there any option of a film going on this? And I said yes. And she went like, who would you like to cast? And I went like, actually, you would be fabulous. So that also is not my job, but it's a great read. I think it really does work very, very well as a read, as it does as a printed book.
So the book has already been optioned. Is that what you're saying?
Not yet, but no. I am getting, as we speak, I'm getting some very interesting emails.
Ah, I love to hear that. Okay, so you took a couple of years away from writing fiction. Can you tell us what you were working on?
Yes, I was writing on Normal Women, which is the title of the book, which I wanted to really capture the idea that the history of normal women has never been told in England. All you have is the history of the women who fell foul of the system, or women who attracted the attention of historians because they were absolutely extraordinary, extraordinarily good or extraordinarily bad. But throughout all of our history, 50% of the nation has been women behaving normally, getting on with their lives. And the normality includes being pirates and being soldiers and being stonemasons and being bankers and being brewers and theatre impresarios. The range of women's activity right the way up to about the 19th century is absolutely equal to what men are doing. In the 19th century, you get this incredible pushback by society, which starts defining women as people who cannot be trusted with power, with responsibility, or even with dangerous and difficult work in the outside world, just ladies. The working women are allowed to carry on doing all the horrible jobs, all the dangerous, dirty jobs, and they do carry on doing that. So you get this extraordinary sort of crevasse opens between the experience of ladies and the experience of working women, and that, in a sense, curses feminism in the UK for generations, because what you then lack is the educated, leisured, able women supporting working women until we have the sense to do that about the end of the 19th century. So it's a story of women's struggle to gain equal rights and to gain equal pay. My book starts in 1066 with the invasion of William of Normandy, and why that's important is he brings in feudal law, which takes women's rights from the Anglo-Saxon society, where they had enjoyed not equal rights, but a lot. And that those rights are not restored, some of them until the 20th century. It's an extraordinary big book. It's 900 years of history, and it's an extraordinary story of struggle, both making progress and losing ground. Mm-hmm. And I suppose the lesson from it is that women never stop trying, that even at the worst moments when women are paid the least or forced into the worst jobs, or when their health is endangered by such dangerous medical practices in childbirth, women never stop working and trying to earn money and trying to protect their children and trying to build their home and trying to support their husbands and trying to live a life also of their own making. You know, what you see over and over again is that women in all sorts of circumstances pick themselves up and go like, what do I want to be? How do I want to live? And that's why, although it's somebody said to me that it had taken them 18 months to read the book because they had to stop because they felt so angry. And it is in many ways infuriating. But at the same time, I find it really inspiring that it's a story of struggle that never stops.
Mm-hmm. That's true, even today.
Even today.
Trajan from Phoenix Public Library is saying, previously you've said that you had no interest in writing a book about Jane Seymour. Has your position on this changed?
Yes, absolutely. Isn't it funny? Yes. I mean, I wasn't interested in Jane Seymour because I was so interested in the Boleyns. And now having written a book about Jane Boleyn, in which we see Jane Seymour in a very different light because she is lady in waiting to Jane Seymour. So we see Jane Seymour's brief period as queen. And I mean, you couldn't write a book, I think, about someone's lady in waiting without seeing them through their eyes, and that brought me to a more sympathetic view of Jane than I have ever had before. And I would like to apologize to Jane Seymour and say, although she wasn't queen for very long, although she wasn't apparently very effective in steering Henry VIII, the previous wife had a lot of trouble doing that, and you couldn't blame any woman for wanting to keep her head down and on around Henry VIII.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you working on next then?
My next book is going to be about two women, one almost unknown, Jacqueline of Hainault, who was niece to the Duke of Burgundy and very, very important in Europe during the 100 Years' War, but nobody's heard of her. And the woman who worked as her lady in waiting, Eleanor Cobham, who ultimately married her husband and therefore became Duchess of Gloucester and was convicted at a trial of trying to assassinate the king, Henry VI. So we're right in the Plantagenet court, just about the time that Margaret of Anjou comes to England. So we're right at the time of the novel I wrote, Lady of the Rivers, but from a very, very different perspective. And this time from a woman who is convicted of witchcraft and who almost certainly was experimenting with witchcraft to see what she could do.
Mm-hmm. What inspires you to jump between the eras? Like, how do you get the idea and go, okay, yes, we need to go backward, we need to go forward?
I'm always drawn by the character. So when I was thinking about what book I would want to do after Boleyn.
Oh no, you're muted again.
I'm back. I'm so sorry. I've been wanting for a long time to do a book about Eleanor Cobham. She's not got an extant biography. Hardly anybody has worked on her in any detail at all. They've worked a bit on her husband, Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, and of course she's part of the court of Henry V and Henry VI, who are two very well-known kings. But she herself is very neglected by history, and yet her story is extraordinary. I mean, a really dark medieval story about a woman who tries to ascend by the ordinary means of marrying the right man and accruing wealth, and then goes down the dark route of actually necromancy. And we know that she did that because the evidence at her trial tells us even which books she used for the spells to call up the devil. It's an extraordinary story. It's very dark again.
Oh, okay. Are you currently writing that, or can we expect that tomorrow?
I am currently writing it. You can't expect it tomorrow, but you can expect it about this time next year.
Okay. Can't wait for that. Okay, last question that we love to ask everyone. What are you reading right now that everyone should run out to their library and check out immediately?
I'm reading right now some books for background for Eleanor Cobham, and I don't think anybody would be very thrilled by reading them. But on audio, I'm reading Molly Keane. So any Molly Keane book, I really, really recommend. She writes about Ireland pretty well between the wars and sometimes pre-war, 1418 war. She describes a society that has completely disappeared, the Anglo-Irish aristocracy, who ruled Ireland as English landlords and were challenged ultimately by the Irish rebellion. the Irish Revolutionary Army. She describes a world which is completely gone and which has that sort of glorious golden sense of it couldn't possibly be sustained, it couldn't possibly survive. I very much like, one of her books is called Famous Friends, and all of her books are completely brilliant, and I recommend her very, very highly for completely escapist fiction, because I think she's very accurate about the society, but the society is long gone.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you very much for that recommendation. And thank you so much for joining us today. It's truly been a pleasure to talk to you for the last hour. And just thank you so much for sharing your work with us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I also want to extend a huge thank you to all of our viewers. Without your support, none of this would be possible. So we thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. If you scroll down below the live stream video, you can see the resources area, which contains a link to Boleyn Traitor. So make sure you check that out. I am Brandon Adler, and thank you for joining us today.